You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact, because you've run out of other things to listen to. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This time we have been watching Night Terrors. It had a story by Shari Goodharts, a teleplay by Pamela Douglas and Jerry Taylor, and was directed by Liz Landau. It first aired the week of March 18th, 1991. James, what is this one all about?
The Enterprise discovers the missing science vessel, the USS Brattain, abandoned in space. It turns out all of the crew have killed each other, having gone slowly mad but with no apparent explanation. When they try to leave, the Enterprise also finds itself stuck and tensions start to rise, with the crew succumbing to the same condition that afflicted those on the Brattain. Turns out they are stuck in a weird space rift which requires massive explosion to escape from. But apparently they don't have anything powerful enough on board. But they're not alone. Aliens are trying to communicate with Troy through her dreams, which is causing disastrous side effects for everybody else. Can they make her understand before it's too late?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is it. So, Alex, you have never seen this episode before. Do you like 80s horror movies?
Well, you're quite right. I've never seen this episode before. I have, however, seen the Doctor Who episode Night Terrors, which aired in Series 6 in 2011. I've not watched that since it first aired. I watched the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Night Terrors last night. I remember it less well than that episode of Doctor Who. In my mind, it's a collection of scenes in search of a plot. I mean, there is a plot, but it's entirely possible, and I'm guessing that I'm not alone in this, that I was so jaded by Geordie complaining about being in the friend zone from double banking this episode with the previous one that we recorded First Contact with, that my attention had waned by the time that I reached this episode. But I think that's probably a part of it, but I also think that it's just also a bit bland, really.
I actually had exactly the same experience, because I went to watch this yesterday, right after we had finished watching Galaxy's Child. I say we all sit in the same house and we watched Star Trek together.
You subjected your wife to Galaxy's Child.
And I tried to watch Night Terrors, but I honestly couldn't focus after that. I was just like, no, I cannot take this on after Galaxy's Child. And so I watched it today. And you're right, it doesn't really hang together, and I get what they're going for as well. But this is one of the earliest episodes I ever saw, I think, in my brain. And I remember it being about 90% Troy hanging around in the sky, flying. Like, that's my main memory of it. I'd kind of forgotten the other elements of it, which are fine. It's a bit like Remember Me in some respects, which is doing an episode of The Twilight Zone. And this is trying to do a sort of lots of creepy visuals, horror movie, tension rising kind of thing. It's not even that different from something like The Naked Time, but it's just...
But the episode it reminded me of more than anything else. What was the one in season 1 where they're all sex crazed?
The Naked Now.
The Naked Now. It reminded me of that, in the sense that there's this thing that's happening, and then it's a series of scenes of, oh, let's look at how it's affecting this person. Let's look how it's affecting this person. But instead of, oh, aren't they horny? It's, oh, aren't they angry? And it doesn't amount to very much. It felt like a combination of that stapled on to every Troy-centric episode that we've ever had.
I feel like the mystery at the core wasn't spread well enough throughout the episode. No. It wasn't seeded. And I think that's the core of the issue, because for me, the ending worked well and the setup was fine. It was just that middle 20 minutes where they just go from person to person acting a bit silly, but not played for laughs.
And yet, weirdly, the idea of having the crew sort of becoming progressively stupider there's something in that. I think you could do a good comedy episode out of that, actually.
Yeah. It could have been played for laughs.
Yeah.
Going and getting the gun out is funny.
You could go one of two ways. You could either really ramp it up into the horror or ramp it up into the comedy. And I feel that it doesn't have the force of its convictions in either direction. So it just ends up sort of bubbling along, but it doesn't grab you, I think.
They kind of try to have the cake and eat it by doing both. Like, for example, you've got the moment where Picard's in the lift, and it's quite a well done shot of seemingly having the lift fall onto him, and then the doors open and it's just him screaming on the floor, which you're now laughing at this horror moment. It feels tonally just doesn't know what it wants to be.
I think it does want to be a horror movie. I do think it's got a bit of Nightmare on Elm Street vibes about it, but I do think they needed to go further in that direction. Like the Crusher in the morgue with all the bodies sitting up. That feels like a kind of Doctor Who scary moment.
It feels like Listen, specifically. That's what it made me think of.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are those little shots, and you're just like, okay, that's kind of creepy. But there's other stuff that is just, I think, very poorly written and very poorly executed. I would point to that scene with the O'Briens, which is what is that?
Coming off the back of the previous episode with all of its MRA action, I really did sort of get the thing of, oh Christ, not another toxic man.
But it's just the performance, I think, is really bizarre, and the staging of it is just this one shot, and Keiko walks in, and then she acts a bit weird, and then he acts weird. It's like the direction's completely off because the conversation is completely inorganic, and it doesn't really matter that they're both on edge, but because it just feels like they're acting in a play.
We need a scene in 10 Forwards where somebody is talking to O'Brien about Keiko working with this other guy for him to get riled up suddenly and get angry. We have no idea, because it actually seems like this isn't part of the main plot. We're used to having B-plots.
He's just angry that he can't have his potatoes and offal for breakfast.
But this happens before everyone's like been getting tense or anything. This is really early on, and basically it's
so
a plot that
he's just a dick,
or she's having an affair. Like it feels very. It just feels. I think Khomeini is a brilliant actor, but I think he is absolute Hammond in that particular scene. I just think it's rotten, and it doesn't really help the episode in any way. And then you've got like conspiracy guy in 10 Forward, and it just. None of these things are really interesting enough. If you're going to do people can't sleep, so their nightmares are coming true, there's a better way of doing that. Their nightmares are leaking out into reality. I think that's a bit more interesting, because they start with hallucinations, and you think, okay, but what's the worst hallucination is that Captain Picard hears his doorbell.
That was very funny, to be fair. I really laughed at that scene.
I can't decide whether it be better or worse, but it does feel like it's odd that they don't go for personalised nightmares to a greater degree, because the Crusher one, Doctor, Bodies in a Morgue, yeah, but it does feel like if you're talking about deep-seated fears, I doubt that Picard's is being crushed by a lift.
Picard's greatest fear is the doorbell going.
or that Chief O'Brien's is having to have another conversation about botany.
Yeah, I mean, this idea is done better in other episodes, in other shows, but
it's been done better in this show.
Yeah, absolutely. It all doesn't hang together, because I guess you've got this whole dream element with Troy, and again another scene with Troy waking up in her bed, and you just think, oh, this again, is this all we can do with Troy?
Yes, that was very much my thought as soon as I saw that. It's another pyjama shot. But who wears a nightgown that has a choker? That seems impractical. That seems like something you could kill yourself in your sleep with.
The whole setup is there's this Betazoid on board the ship, and he knows something, and there's a greater secret about him, and there's a greater mystery. But they just abandon that. That he is not a character. It's like, why is he sort of comatose? Oh, because he witnessed everyone killing each other. The whole setup, it feels like an episode of Red Dwarf, doesn't it? That's sort of like they've not actually done the comedy type thing. It's
Red Dwarf would do more convincing corpses, because I was pissing myself laughing at those dead bodies.
No, do you know what was the worst thing? Like the guy sitting at the navigation station, and Riker just grabs his face. Is that how you treat a corpse?
I'm not dead, you know. Well, Riker behaves a little strangely in this episode. There is one shot. I mean, I know obviously he's constantly putting his leg up on chairs, but there's one shot where he's practically rubbing his crotch in the back of Data's head. He's just very frustrated in this episode.
We all do things when we're tired, don't we? But it's a sort of collection of scenes that don't really hang together, and it's kind of a bottle show. They've got that other set, which like is the least convincing bridge I think I've ever seen. It's just rubbish. It's just one station and a chair basically, and fine.
That's what science vessels look like. They don't need all the fancy bridges.
They don't need everyone to have a chair. It's just a bit strange, as well. Like, everybody killed each other, and I get that they were going mad, but would everyone have murdered everybody else and then sat down in their chairs? It feels like a mystery plot, which they didn't really resolve.
A mystery plot where you don't care about the resolution.
Yeah, and because everything's sort of unrelated, isn't it? So you've got the elements, you've got the ship, its engines aren't working, everyone's killed themselves. You've got the one crew member who hasn't, but can't communicate what he knows. You've got Troy having dreams, and then it just turns out, oh, it's another alien ship trying to send a message. And I don't think we quite resolved that. Do you know that alien ship trying to send its message actually killed all that crew? And if they just stayed quiet, everyone would have been fine.
But they didn't intentionally kill them.
No.
They were stuck in the rift as well, and they needed help to get out the rift, and that's why they were communicating. So I don't think we can say that the aliens are evil. They're nice aliens.
No, I wasn't saying they were evil, and what a lovely example of cooperation working together. But it just seems like, the message that Troy gets, and it's just like, hydrogen. Yeah, they want us to send out hydrogen. I thought you said the only things powerful enough to generate a big explosion were all these really complex elements. Yes, but if they combine their fancy one with hydrogen, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's like, does hydrogen create a bigger explosion than a photon torpedo? Why didn't we blow up the Brattain? We forgot about that. It's just all this stuff, and I just don't really care. What I will say is, lots of lovely model shots.
Yeah. That's damning with faint praise, isn't
it?
It's just... You would think an episode, though, dealing with the themes that this is dealing with should never, ever really justifiably be boring.
No.
And yet, somehow, they managed to climb that mountain.
It should be an episode where there's some really interesting visuals and some really fun paranoia going on, but it's like they're afraid to actually let loose. They have the bar brawl, which is actually
silly.
It's silly and cliched, and then it's broken up by Guinan, who is also apparently fine. But they don't take it to the edge enough. Like, all the characters we see, it's just, they're so dull, and what they're experiencing isn't that interesting. It's just, it would be better as, how does each individual character, what do they hallucinate when they're not allowed to dream? And that is, it should be the nightmare show.
Geordie's is just him being spurned again by Leah Brahms.
over and over and over again. You've got the scene in the turbo lift with Riker and Picard where they're discussing the chain of command and how they've got to hold it together. And fine, and then Picard sends Riker to have a nap.
Yeah, he orders him to take a nap.
It's so funny because they're having a perfectly reasonable conversation, but then when he's ordered to go for the nap, he looks so surly about it.
Well, I mean, you can choose to read it that way, that he's just asking him to go for a nap, but I did look at it a different way when the line is, and I quote, "I'll be on the bridge. You can relieve me in 4 hours." Well, that's caring between the crew, but it's probably inappropriate at this time during a crisis.
That was Riker's nightmare.
Just pumping away for hours.
And it's also one of these episodes where Data is unaffected by any of this. Like so many episodes, but again, they don't really make the most of that. And once again, we have done that very recently with clues far more interestingly.
Well, again, that would be the thing to do if you're going for the comedy thing, when people are forgetting things later on. Have Data completely unaffected while the rest of the crew become progressively stupider. That'd be interesting.
There's also the whole thing of, you could do, if everyone's about to break out into riots and is paranoid, just knock everyone out.
You're thinking of Legion from Red Dwarf.
They realised that although all the humans on board are affected, the dogs aren't.
The puppies are fine.
The puppies are fine. So, it's Captain Snoopy. And you've got Lieutenant Commander Baxter. He's in charge of security, He's a bulldog.
What do you make of the dream world?
Well, I mean, it's quite like the motion picture ish. It feels like they're trying to ape that a little bit. That's about the most interesting thing I can say about it, to be honest.
It should be more disorientating, shouldn't it? It should. I think the visuals are kind of fine. It is really weird, just Counselor Troy floating and flying. Like the most awkward looking flying I think I've ever seen on screen. And I guess, that's okay, but I think the direction just needed to be a bit weirder. I think it needed to kind of have more disturbing angles and maybe more weird cuts and dissolves to create that real dreamlike atmosphere.
Any sort of dream world, the best ones are always ones that portray a complete lack of logic. And I mean, it's not an example of something that is a dream world, but the first example that's coming to mind is in as we record this now, the most recent released Marvel film in Spider-Man Far From Home. The whole way that VR world and everything sort of, nothing quite fits together and sort of dissolves between different bits, and that sort of complete lack of logic. I'd have liked to have seen something more like that, which is obviously ridiculous on that budget, but...
You will do in a future Star Trek The Next Generation episode.
Oh, well, there you go.
How would you like Troy as a cake?
Like you said, the whole mystery isn't seeded throughout, and then all of a sudden it's an alien trying to communicate, which again is the same thing that happened in The Loss when Troy lost all her powers and it only affected her. So, it feels like the only plots you can do with her are people getting into her head or a tricky romance. Like, it's just...
Or sometimes both at the same time.
Oh, yeah. It was amazing she didn't have a relationship with the coma guy. Nothing really fits together because that mystery, and then it's like we're looking at elements on a screen. Okay, good. And then it's like, oh, hydrogen.
That is so 90s CITV. Vaguely sciencey show. Well, no, actually, that's like a line I would expect in on CBBC on the Demon Headmaster when they're trying to conduct an experiment to stop the plant form of the Demon Headmaster. Look, what can stop him? Look, hydrogen! And then Danny John Jules comes out as a game show host.
It is one plot, we'll give it that, but there's almost like lots of sketches within it. And, so you've got the Chief O'Brien sketch, and then you've got the Dr. Crusher sketch. And I think the performances, to be honest, are not great in this. I don't think people are doing good drunk acting. I'd say, like, Dr. Crusher, like, trying to slur words, it feels very... It feels like bad acting, a lot of it, and I get what they're going for, but nobody really feels particularly on edge.
Well, except for Worf, Worf is so on edge he tries to kill himself.
Yeah, we've not even spoken about that. What is that?
Cheery.
that scene is just... It's meant to be heartfelt, and it's meant to be... But we've not seen anything. Worf's just standing at the station and is like, I've got to go. I'm a bit tired, so I have to kill myself. And
strangely, perfectly in character for Worf.
And if you've been affected by any issues in Star Trek The Next Generation, phone the Samaritans.
And once again, we'll have a much better Worf suicide episode at a later point.
Jesus Christ.
It's like this episode has lots of elements from lots of bits of Star Trek, and not one of them is done well.
No. It definitely feels like a hodgepodge of plots or strands from from season 1 and 2. Definitely feels like that.
I find it really...
And also, what was that episode where people were melting through the floor? It feels like that as well.
The weird thing is, I'm going to defend it a little.
Oh, go on.
Only in the sense that this has a terrible reputation. I don't think it deserves as bad a reputation as it has. It manages to do some things quite well.
James, you shill for CBS.
I think we were coming off, I think, the back of a really good run of episodes. And I think we have now 2 in a row which are kind of clunkers. When you compare this to First Contact, the episode, it feels like a different show. And I was saying back then, isn't it great all the different formats they can embrace? But the problem is, as the show's gone on, it's got a lot of cliches. And if you hit every single one of these cliches, including trying to use a deflector dish to escape, and even referencing that in the episode... It doesn't quite work. Don't remind people that you've done the same thing better in different places.
You know what I really would have liked? If they saved the day and then the camera pans up from Data and Picard is just in his chair asleep snoring.
That would have been fine. I think that would have been good. And Data just carries him to his bed and gets him into his pyjamas.
Oh, we've seen where that goes before. We're going back to the naked now again.
Orgies everywhere.
Fully functional.
I don't feel we've said an awful lot about this, but I don't think there's a great deal to say.
Were there more of consequence to be said about it, I think we would have said it by this point in time. I mean, things happen, but it's just... It doesn't feel they're particularly worthy of comment.
The thing with episodic television is that when the Enterprise gets trapped, you know it's going to be out by the end of the episode. And that is often not a problem because you're engaged, you feel the drama, and you want to see how it's resolved. In this case, it's just not there because the mystery isn't set up properly. They say right at the start, this is a Tyche drift. To escape from this, you need a big explosion. So you know they're going to get a big explosion. And how they do it is just like, oh, okay, that solution sort of came out of left field. It did tie elements of the episode together, but I don't feel it's satisfying in any way. It doesn't feel like there was enough for people to overcome, really, and the crew in general didn't actually play a part in solving the problem. Troy and Data sat at a computer screen and everyone went, that was fine.
Well, that would be our assessment of the episode, but I don't know. Was it fine? It was 45 minutes, more give or take. I'll give it that. Actually, I'm doing it a disservice. It was 45 minutes and 34 seconds.
I would say it's not as hateful as Galaxy's Child, but I think in terms of competence, it's a bit worse.
There's one for the Blu-ray sleeve.
Okay, we'll discuss various bits of behind-the-scenes trivia in quickfire.
Quickfire.
Jonathan Frakes was oddly candid about this episode. He remarks, "That was a yawner, wasn't it? That was a shitty piece of special effects work when Troy was flying with those clouds around her. That was below our standard." Now,
I like drunk freaks.
he's being really harsh on the episodes. It's not. I think it's fine. It's not that bad.
It's not that good either, though, is it?
It's not good, but it's not. It's not an episode that I would skip. Put it that way.
Michael Pillar said it was the first show right after the Christmas hiatus, and I don't think everybody was quite back on their feet yet. As a result, the energy level was way down, and the timing was off, and the nature of the problem made everyone start reading slowly. It was no longer a script because they were dream deprived. They were all talking slowly, and after a while that gets pretty boring, and the middle of that show sagged and was slow, boring, and disappointing. I think that's a pretty decent assessment of the episode. But that's not the last of their writers to weigh in. Jerry Taylor said, "This was a real tough episode. It was convoluted, it was a little mysterious, technical, quasi-supernatural, it was all over the map, and there were a lot of different episodes to try and make cohesive." Wow. We like totally understand television. I rewrote it, and I never thought we were going to put that one to bed. It was strange. Troy's dream sequences are not something you get to see every week. It's finding the little ray of sunshine there.
It does seem to be that they were rewriting it, and eventually they got to the point where they just said, we need to write an ending. We need to make it make sense. And then that was just hurriedly written to make it all work.
The Star Trek Next Generation companion says this episode is considered to be one of the weakest of the fourth season, and many members of the production staff were unhappy with it. The scenes of Troy flying were said to be a terrible mistake. The USS Brattain is a redress of the Reliant from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. The explosion of the rift is reused footage from the Genesis device in Star Trek II as well. Lots of reuse going on here.
Well, turning to the cretinous compendium that is the Nitpicker's Guide, I think Phil struggled with this episode every bit as much as we did. He doesn't really have a lot to say on it. He certainly doesn't offer us the enormous diatribe that he dedicated to the previous episode, but he does have one problem with the plot. He says, when the crew looks for a way to create a massive explosion and escape the rift, no one mentions setting the Britannian to self-destruct. Wouldn't an uncontrolled overload cause a pretty good bang? Do you think that's his chat-up line?
Ladies, I've just set myself to self-destruct.
That was certainly another episode that we're glad we spent our time talking about. Next time, we will be talking about Identity Crisis, so we hope you'll join us for that one. But for now, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.